FTE and add it together and divide it by what a 1.0 would be. And there are, I think what surprised me at first when I did this earlier and came back that we had more full-time equivalents this year than we had last year. And then when I looked at it, really what it was based on was the voluntary pre-K program that received additional funding, and we added staff to. So that was the majority of the reasons for that. Overall, you'll notice in the ethnicity the very low percentages of the teachers and administrators of color. And we had a slight uptick in where our teachers, the white teachers are and administrators are. But overall, this has stayed fairly static for the last few years. And it is a goal of ours to increase it and to improve it. And there are some, what I want to call, not incentives, are when we have a challenge that way, goals, I'll put it that way, to increase that going forward.
Thank you. Member Trinka.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's my questions along those lines. What is the district doing proactively to try to hire more teachers of color? There was just a study that was released yesterday or the day before, I think, about the performance enhancements for young men who are African American when they have teachers who are African American, especially in the elementary ages. So what is the district doing around recruitment efforts?
There are a number of things we do in terms of recruitment as far as visiting the colleges. There's the state, Minnesota State recruitment fair for teachers. I know if you've followed it in the newspaper and everything, the biggest challenge is really getting more students of color to go into the teaching profession. It's actually declining. And in the areas that tend to gather individuals of color, they like to stay in those areas and pursue their teaching careers where they grew up. So to that end, the Duluth schools has started that Pathways to Teaching program, which is to encourage our students into the career of teaching. I'm not going to call it a consensus, but a number of programs are more of a grow your own. If you want them to stay in the area and contribute to your schools, how can you do that on your own in your own areas? I was listening yesterday to a program, I believe it was the St. Paul School District, that in conjunction with a college down there, it was a private school, it wasn't a public school, started a program. It was a fifth-year teaching program, kind of like you go in as an apprentice. It's an apprentice teaching program. But the school district itself offered a number of incentives, a salary for that, a reduced cost of their master's program that takes about a year to get through. And there was a contingency on having to stay in the school district for, I believe it's 3 years. And I think in the last 2 to 3 years that they've had it, I think they mentioned 76 teachers go through that program. So there are incentives and programs that are out there that I know Member Gorham has just sent us some information too that we're researching. So
as a follow-up to that, I recognize that we're probably not in a financial position to have financial inducements. And the federal grants that are available for loan repayment go to inner city schools and under rural communities.
A bit more activities towards recruitment of teachers of color. Again, I do believe the biggest hurdle, and I don't want to put it out there as a block, but I think the biggest hurdle is getting the number of teachers into the teaching program.
Okay, thank you.
Member Oswald.
I was at a meeting this weekend where there was a the current teacher that received her teaching license by being able to go to UMD through a scholarship given to them through EAC, through the EAC committee. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that we can grow our own with some incentives that way? Is there money set aside for those kinds of things? Because I know that program was eliminated.
Well, there actually is a program through the, I think it's the Native American, I don't know, I'm going to call it a foundation, but it's through UMD. And our Indian Education Director right now is in charge of that program. So we do, and it does offer scholarships to individuals. Now, it doesn't tie them to the school district, but we do know who those individuals are and have met with them and introduced ourselves. And in some cases, we've used them in some capacity in the district. But I can tell you right now, one of our teachers who was on a elementary, it's a tiered license now, but typically it was kind of a community ed license, who's working on the program is at our Lowell School for Ojibwe immersion program. And one of our other individuals I know we've used on a couple of occasions as a long-term sub. So.
Anything else? Gorham.
Thank you for sharing this information with the board. I think it's good to do at least on an annual basis so that we can continue to have these conversations. And I know that there's been work going forward to increase diversity among our staff to hopefully meet our students' needs as best as possible. And I recognize it's a multi-level system issue. So just want to acknowledge that and thank you for the work that we're doing to try to increase that and address it all across the board. Thanks.
I would want to add one more thing with the Native American program. There's a state statute out there which we've used in the past and we would use, again in the future, that protects Native American educators from basically layoffs. So it allows us to keep a less senior teacher in the district in the event of layoffs. Now, having said that, knock on Formica, we have not had that problem the last 5 years, but when I first came to the district, it was a big issue. So,
Thank you. Anything else? Member Lofold.
Well, that begs the question that if we have that provision for our Indigenous community staff, do we have that for our African American?
unfortunately, no. It's been on the books for a long time, but it was specifically designed to retain, to your point, Indigenous educators. Yep.
All right. I think there's no future items or policies, nothing else, unless somebody has a question. And if not, I'll conclude the HR committee.
Can I chime in before Tim leaves? Just about just overall staffing and our districts. It seems like we have just, unless job postings upon job postings, is that a typical, like, just, this is my first year, but it seems like we are posting in all areas, usually not in our teaching staff. And then again, the whole conversation about our district employees and our whole staffing as far as cultural experiences and presence within our district. And with Member Oswald's point, just are we doing other things too with job fairs and presence at the state fair? I don't know. Where do we go? Where does ISD 709 show up in our communities or in our state or in our mid-states for job fair opportunities?
The instruction, well, the teacher job fair, the Minnesota State Job Fair for teachers is one of the bigger ones around, and its attendance has been diminishing in the last few years, and we've attended that. I think we've been there 6 or 7 years. We go every year. And there are means in that for us to say, we're going to be here, come and talk to us, here's the positions we're going to be looking for, and we always have our special ed positions on there, and some of the immersion positions have been on there recently, and students can contact us to set up an interview while we're there. We have had the opportunity in the past, knowing with special ed that we were able to offer positions, even though we couldn't tell them exactly where they would be. And that is one of the strategies we're entertaining for this year, knowing that we'll have additional teachers that will be filling positions. So to bring them on board. It's well, when you're talking about how big that fair is, there are, besides the Minnesota school districts in there are international schools and schools like from Alaska and everything that attend that fair. It's a fairly large one, and the people I've talked to there say that's one of the better ones that they go to. They do pride. There's a lot of pride in the development of Minnesota teachers, and other educating organizations and institutions recognize that, and that is why they do want to come to Minnesota, because we have high standards and as well as a good work ethic in our teachers.
Member left, okay.
Sorry, I don't want to drag this on, especially when I didn't hear all of the discussion, and I apologize for being late. But did you talk any, and maybe in the future you can, about, I know we had a conversation one time about the different ways you work with our universities here and the departments within the universities for recruitment. And I don't know if that was part of this conversation, but I think that you do some really good work from the conversations we've had before on that.
There's career fairs that they have. There's kind of like the instructors will get their teaching students together and invite in a number of the schools from the area, and we'll come in and have a panel for them in front of them, answer questions. Superior was enjoyable because you have a Wisconsin license and a Minnesota license, and there's a lot of confusion over what would it take to get licensed in Minnesota, and we have these MTLE tests that we make our new teachers pass, and they still are using the praxis. So there's some differences there, but there's some differences in the rules. If you're coming from Wisconsin, for example, you have a year to take that exam, where if you're in Minnesota, you have to show them that you have taken that exam before they'll issue you a license. In addition, it's Pelsby now, which we used to call Minnesota Department of Education. They've gone to this tiered licensing system, so it's not really it's necessary to have a teaching license. I don't want to downplay that, but it's not necessary to have procured a 4-year teaching degree before you can be licensed by Pelsby now for licensing in the state of Minnesota. So there's a 2-tiered system that do not require a formal teaching degree, and then there's 2 more tiers that do require the formal teaching degree.
All right. The end. Thank you.
Come in late. You're done.
Thank you. Is the superintendent going to join us? He's not. Okay. Well, that's too bad because I brought cookies to celebrate his birthday. So we'll still have cookies. Jeff, you need the calories with your workouts, and I think this is going to be a marathon of a meeting. So they're cookies from the 3rd Street Bakery. So help yourself.
On the behalf of the superintendent, I would like to say thank you for bringing cookies for his birthday, and I will have a cookie in his honor, as well as one for myself.
We have a 6:15 teacher award,
Yep.
Teacher of the Year thing, so.
I was just going to say that. So
Okay.
we need to be wrapped up by then, which is going to be interesting because we've got a lot to get through. So I'm going to start and hand it over to the CFO or do we want to hand it over to Whipfley? We'll hand it over to Whipfley for a walkthrough of the audit. Thank you. Thanks, Jill. Member Lofald. You can sit. Can I just ask quickly? Well, I already am. I'm going to ask a procedural question. So we're going to walk through your PowerPoint presentation, which I'm assuming is a mirror of what's in our board packet, our business committee
should
packet.
be. I haven't looked at the board packet.
Kathy?
But,
We'll save one for you.
okay, thank you.
I'm just, because if we have questions, I'm not sure if we should reference what we have in board book or what we have here, or both.
Peggy, there's no material changes in the charts that are in this packet versus what they're seeing.
Correct. The only changes that were in from your original packet are like wording changes in the notes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you're going to walk us through this.
I will walk you through the PowerPoint
Thank you.
slides, yes. I could walk you through the financial statement if you really want to do that. I don't know if it sounds like you guys are on a time crunch, so we won't do that. Okay. So my name is Tim Bradshaw. I work with Whipfley CPAs and Consultants. I'm a manager out of the Duluth office, and I'm here to present the results of the fiscal year 2018 audit. So let's just dive right in to page 2. So this just goes through our responsibility as the school district's auditors. First and foremost is to issue an opinion on the basic financial statements. Secondly, report on compliance and internal controls over financial reporting. Third, report on compliance and internal controls over federal programs, uniform guidance. That's the single audit piece of the audit. And finally, report on compliance with Minnesota statutes tested. And that one, we are certainly not attorneys, we're CPAs by trade, but the Office of the State Auditor of Minnesota puts out compliance guides every year for different types of governmental entities. We use those as checklists, go through them, make sure everything's covered. And if we turn to page 3, this is the good news. Our results. Unmodified opinion on the basic financial statements. Essentially, that just means they are correct. There's nothing missing that should be there. There might be things in there that don't necessarily have to be there, but yeah, they're materially correct. So the finance department is doing a great job. So no internal control findings over financial reporting. That's consistent with years past. I don't think we've really, since I've been working on the audit, we've never had an internal controls issue. No non-compliance or internal controls finding over federal programs. So we tested a couple programs for the single audit, and it's certainly not, I wouldn't say it's as extensive as if MDE sent someone into audit food service or Title I or special education, but we have to test it, get a certain amount of coverage, and we didn't find anything with what we tested. So those programs, they look good from our end. And finally, no non-compliance with Minnesota statutes tested. That just is kind of self-explanatory. So.
Mr. Bradshaw, if I may interject quickly,
Yeah.
do you want us to hold questions until the end?
Oh, you can stop me anytime.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Yeah. Any questions?
No, I just wanted,
Okay. And I will do my best to answer them here, and if I can't answer them, I will certainly get the answers to you. Or I might tap on Peggy and Kathy, because they certainly probably have the answer if I don't. All right. So page 4 gets into the general fund, results of operation. As your auditors, we look at the general fund as funds 1, 3, and 5. I apologize if you already know this. I just like to remind everyone of that, because some districts view the general fund as just Fund 1. But the state considers funds 1, 3, and 5 as the general fund. So, budgeted a $437 increase in your fund balance. Actual results showed a $1.2, almost $1.3 million increase in fund balance. You'll see that roughly half of that is attributed to this other financing sources piece. That's going to be the capital facilities bonds 2017B, and then I think there was a sale of some assets that accounted for $150-ish thousand. So general fund increase. I think that's good news for Duluth schools. And you can see you're a little bit under budget on the revenues, and I'm assuming that's probably mostly due to calculations of certain state aids that are very tricky. Enrollments also, But started the year with a fund balance of $111,418 and ended the year at $1,408,949. So again, I think that's pretty good news. If you want to turn to page 5, this is just a breakdown of the fund balance. So you can see far left column was where things were at the beginning of the year and where things are at the end of the year. Non-spendable is, as it says, inventory and prepaid items. The restrictions are revenues that come in that need to be used for certain things as per the Minnesota Department of Education. And finally, the big one that I'm happy to see is the unassigned went from a deficit of $485,864 to a positive of almost $400,000. So that's, again, good news from what I can see. Any questions so far? All right. Next page is just where your unassigned fund balance as a district has been over the last 5 years. It was a lot higher back in 2014 and 2015, but the key here, I think, is it's back in the positive. So,
do you have some historical knowledge as to why? Because that's a really significant difference. What caused the disparity between 3.7 million and 400,000?
Do you have an idea, Peggy?
Peggy, you're our resident historian.
I think the biggest change, and of course it didn't, result for all of it, but 2016 was when we first encountered the change on special ed funding, and that has really instituted a lot. And then in 2017, we just had a lot of expenses that we didn't anticipate, and had reductions in enrollment that we didn't anticipate. And then, so now I think we're getting a little better about budgeting and what we're actually anticipating coming in. Our special ed funding is still low and way below what our expenses are. So there's a huge gap there.
And one other thing related to that special ed funding, it's based on data from 2 years ago, so that's just how the state does it. Certainly a lot changes over 2 years. But, yeah, I mean, again, unassigned fund balance went in the right direction, and I think the district has gotten a better handle on budgeting for that piece of it. So page 7. This is the unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. We can see it's always been a fairly low percentage of unrestricted, and we consider unassigned and assigned fund balances as unrestricted. Part of the reason for that is, expenditures here are very, very high. They're a lot higher than most districts. In fact, almost all districts in the state, I think. But, you know, I guess, you know, again, you can see you went from having a negative general fund percentage or unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of expenditures to a positive. This is me being the eternal optimist, but
Could you say that again? I guess I missed part of that. We're the highest in the state for one of the highest in the state for what?
as far as general fund expenditures go, you know, we don't audit every school district, but for the school districts that we audit out of our office, Duluth is certainly, you know, highest expenditure. It makes sense based on population, student counts.
Is some of that also potentially going to be corrected when we take a look at how we're maximizing the utilization of our funds? So this might look different next year?
So we're ranked 26th in the state for enrollment, just as a comparison. So when he says we're on the top end, we're, you know, of 337 school districts, we're in the top 30 as far as enrollment, and then that would correlate to the budget. In terms of how this will look differently, I hope it does look differently as we're going to be looking at the budgeting process. As Peggy mentioned, just making sure that we're just doing those checks of spending our revenues efficiently.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so that's all I've got on this page. And that's all that we've got for the general fund. So we'll get into some other fund information here. Page 8 shows food service. Budgeted a decrease in fund balance of $392,204. Actual showed an increase in fund balance of $71,671. Ending fund balance for the year, $973,719, and that's broken out into about $102,000 of inventory, $1,800 or so dollars of prepaid expenditures, and the remainder is restricted for use in food service. Page 9 is community service. This fund did show a decrease in fund balance of $60,510. Looks like the planned decrease was quite a bit more than that. So, you know, not really a surprise from an auditing perspective that it decreased since it was actually planned to be that way. Ending fund balance at June 30th, 2018 of $1,227,352, and that is broken down into $13,473 of non-spendable, being prepaid items, and the remainder is restricted. And those restrictions are again set aside, or I guess set up and determined by the Minnesota Department of Education. Capital Projects Fund. And I apologize, I apparently did not paste this properly, so we ended at the net change in fund balance, but I will give you the rest of the information. General revenues in this fund were strictly investment related. In capital projects funds, really the only time that there's money coming in is when debt is issued. So, and that did happen in fiscal year 18. Issued $3,640,000 of facilities maintenance bonds. There was about a $17,000 premium, and you can see there was a transfer out to I believe that went to debt service. And that's all based on the supporting documentation we get from the bond people. But, you know, Capital Projects Fund, you can see there's a deficiency before this debt issuance, which means, you know, you decrease the fund balance prior to, well, not prior to, I'm just going to start over. Capital projects funds are expected to be spent because the money comes in and you use it to, you know, build buildings, maintain facilities, etc. So fund balance increased $642,528. Beginning of the year fund balance was $187, ended the year with a fund balance of $642,715, and most of that is restricted for long-term facilities maintenance. And I'm not sure, for fiscal 19, that's a fairly small amount given the size of the district. So I'm thinking, and Peggy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that money will probably be spent by the end of fiscal 19.
Yes.
So, capital projects fund might go away next year. We'll see when we get there. Page 11 is the debt service fund. Revenues of $20,922,753. That is really coming just from the levy used to pay the expenditures. You can see they almost wash. Debt service, I've heard it, and I like the way it's described this way. It's kind of a self-correcting fund. Money comes in from levies. Money goes out to pay the obligations for principal and interest on debt. So. Below, you can see in this other financing sources and uses section, there's actually a uses of $53,736,796. The bulk of that, almost 53 million of that is really coming from refunding that occurred. So money was placed into escrow, and those bonds were called. Money came out of escrow to cover the bonds. Again, planned for a decrease of 51.3 million. Actual was a decrease of 53.8 million. So nothing too shocking, nothing unexpected there. Ended the year with a fund balance and debt service of $84,715,346. And that is restricted for debt service. That bond refunding amount actually ties back to the market value of an escrow statement at June 30th for some funds that were in escrow. So, and the last page that we have here is we've added this year to all of our district presentations, just to kind of give the idea of the outstanding debt where it's at. So started the year with $353,580,425 of GO bonds and certificates of participation. Ended the year with $294,530,425 in GO bonds and certificates of participation. There was some new debt that was planned, but the bulk of that pay down was actually just when that refunding occurred. So, yeah, this is really all that I have for going through the results of the audit. I will say again, we really enjoy working with the staff here. They are great. It's going to be fun to work with Kathy going forward too. We've got a lot of experience with her, and yeah.
Can you, I have a few questions, and I think some will probably be directed at you, but
sure.
Could you bring us down from the 30,000-foot level to like the 5,000-foot level of that $294 million of total debt outstanding? How does that compare to other districts of similar size?
So I don't have a great answer for that, just because Duluth is by far the largest school district that we work with. But I don't want to say something that I don't have a good answer for.
Sure, I appreciate that.
But it's kind of all over the board if I was just to kind of pick from my brain as far as where schools are at from a population or enrollment perspective. Some have a priority of maintaining minimum debt levels. Some have they levy, they want a new school and they just try and pass a referendum for it. But as far as Duluth goes, I guess I just don't really have a fantastic answer for you. The big thing that I see here, though, is that decrease from the refunding of $43 million. I think districts in general usually like to see their debt amounts go down. But it's also on, where the board is at with their priorities, I guess, too, as far as where debt levels are. Kathy might have a good idea of some other district. Yeah, I don't have my computer in front of me. So.
And can you, while we're waiting for that, the money that we put towards our debt comes from which funds?
So our debt service is coming from our taxpayers.
Okay.
The Fund 7 debt service is all levy. There are no aid components other than the federal Build America bonds.
And we have some LTFM aid in there.
Yep, with that
Okay.
latest piece. So those general obligation bonds are all levy-based.
Okay.
Could you repeat that again? Because Peggy didn't have the light on, and I don't think that got on the record, whatever Peggy said.
So the LTFM bonds that were just recently issued have an aid component attached to those, but our regular general obligation bonds are all levy. There is no aid component. We do have a Build America bond that has a federal reimbursement. Does that help?
I didn't know what Peggy said.
Peggy was
That's
talking
what Peggy
about the
said.
LTFM.
Sorry to interrupt.
Nope, thanks for asking.
And then one more thing, just a question about something that you stated at the beginning. I think it was on your first slide or your second slide.
Sure.
The information that was supplied by the finance department for the last year, we had some doubts about its accuracy as a board. But you did not find.
So, if that was a problem as far as the audit goes, we would have probably had a material weakness for audit adjustments.
Okay.
But from our standpoint, based on the procedures we performed, and it doesn't mean that an audit is not looking at every single transaction, every dollar, but based on our procedures, and we have to follow very, very strict standards, we didn't find anything that came as a red flag to us. So,
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think at June 30th, these numbers are good.
I have other questions if others don't, but I can defer the floor for a little bit. Okay. I'm looking at the board packet now, and I realize that you don't have a copy of this, so this might be a question for the CFO. It's on page 12 of the packet. Under the financial highlights section. Let me know when you get there.
Financial highlights. I think that's one page back.
Okay.
Are we all there?
Sure.
Is
Got
this
it.
the one you're looking at?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Can you explain that first bullet point to me, please? Someone?
District's total net position deficit of governmental activities decreased approximately $34 million versus 2017. Okay. Sorry, I got to look at a quick.
I think it relates to.
It's going to probably relate
the
to.
Statement of net position.
Yeah. So a lot of that has to do with, and Peggy, you can jump in if I'm off base here, but we find that anytime net position really decreases, there's a lot of stuff on this statement of net position that is, there's a way to put it as kind of off the balance sheet, meaning it's not really recorded in the district's financial software, such as net pension liabilities with para and TRA, other post-employment benefits, liabilities, OPEB.
Could you not use acronyms?
Sure, yeah. So other post-employment benefits.
Thank you.
And para is Public Employees Retirement.
Yes, okay.
TRA is Teachers Retirement Association.
Thank you.
So those liabilities or assets are determined by an actuary. We basically just take the information they provide us and plug it into a district, and they calculate on a statewide basis for the Public Employee Retirement Association and the Teachers Retirement Association. They calculate on a statewide basis liability associated with each district and then allocate it proportionally. And that has to be reported on the statement of net position. And that's as of, I think, June 30th, 2015. There was a new accounting standard that came out that required that. So that's not the first time we've had a question like this. So.
Okay. Then on page 16 of the packet, can you explain to me the $22.6 million due to employees and vendors for expenditures incurred but not paid as of fiscal year end, and $14.1 million other liabilities? Incurred but not paid, that I'm like a little clarification.
So incurred, are you asking about incurred but not paid? I think that's, without looking at it, I'll look at it more closely when Peggy pulls it up, but I think that's more of an accrual type thing, meaning, like Whipley, accounts payable. So we come in, I think we were here in October. So we did the work at one point in October, but the bill came in November. So the actual expense was incurred then, but the cash doesn't go out until after.
Okay, so that's based on the October.
Well, I'm just using us as an example.
Okay.
This is
right.
as of June 30th, so.
Okay.
I can maybe clarify that
Please.
a little better. It would be like regular accounts payable when you get a bill in that pertains to that fiscal year, but you don't pay it until later. And the biggest portion of incurred but not paid is our teachers are paid throughout the summer. They're paid across 12 months, even though they work 9. So everything they've earned through the end of June is not paid until the end of August is when we finish paying them. So all of those, there's 2 months worth of salaries that pertain to the fiscal year, and that gets accrued back to June. So that represents the bulk of the expenses incurred but not paid.
Got it.
Yeah, it's about $10.9 million of it, so.
Okay. So this is partially explained. I'm sorry, guys, in advance, but how are other districts budgeting for retiree benefits? Because it seems like that's where we've got some fluctuation.
Well,
Hot seat.
that's kind of a tricky one. And Kathy looks like she's maybe chomping at the bit.
Nope, you.
So, as far as the public employees' retirement and the teachers' retirement, that one it's tricky because the percentages that the employer contributes are set by essentially state statute. I think it's 7.5% for para right now, and TRA it increased to somewhere between, is it 7.7?
771.
Yeah. But we've had discussions with those entities, and kind of the way they look at it is everyone that has funds there is not going to just all of a sudden retire tomorrow and say, I want my funds. Mm-hmm. Because there are certain requirements that you need to hit to be able to get those. So as far as the Public Employees Retirement Association and the Teachers Retirement Association, that's kind of, it's difficult for the district to do a whole lot about it because it's dependent on what the state says as far as what they need to contribute, and it's dependent on investment performance and some other actuarial assumptions. So, but as far as the other post-employment benefits go, again, it's hard to say what other districts are doing, just because everyone's situation is very different. Some of them have just had good luck because they don't have as many teachers that are, wanting to be a part of that or are eligible to be a part of that, and their liability is not as high as we'll just say Duluth's. So it's going to be kind of, I guess, on the district itself to determine what the course of action is. I don't know if Peggy or Kathy have a better answer.
Well, I was just going to point out that we do budget on an annual basis for what we expect to pay out during the year. So as Tim said, a lot of those huge pension liabilities are actuarial determined and project far out into the future. Mm-hmm. So we're budgeting on an annual basis for what we actually expect to pay out that year.
Thank you. Anything else, Kathy?
Just in my past experience of working with districts from 100 students to 4,000 students, it's true that each district has a different liability share depending on contracts, depending on obligations. There are ways to fund, so there are mechanisms to help fund those things through the levy. There was a window back in 2009 where districts received their liability and could have bonded to put into a trust to help offset those. That window closed in 1 year. It was available and then became unavailable without voter approval. So the pay-as-you-go levy portion that's allowable on each year's levy helps offset those budgeted yearly costs that Peggy referenced. In addition, the financial statements are often giving that broad brush perspective of long range versus what our obligations are in terms of what we have to pay. So there isn't necessarily an expectation that we would have millions of dollars set aside for those future liabilities. It's making sure we're aware of that liability and making sure that we're budgeting correctly in our years and coming years, which is part of our process now of trying to look at effective and efficient ways to spend our dollars and start building that reserve for those future costs.
Great, thank you. One last question, I think. Nope, sorry. Page 59 of the packet, that note 7, long-term liabilities.
I think I'm there.
2024 through 2028, is that $22 million a cumulative number for those 4 years, or is that every year?
No, that's a cumulative number for those years. This is, based on governmental accounting standards, and this is in pretty much any industry, but you have to schedule out your long-term liabilities for the next 5 years, and then in increments of 5 years thereafter. So, okay. Yeah, that total $118 million is not per year. It's from 2024 to 2028.
Okay. That's a scary number if you think about it otherwise. Okay, great. I actually am done with my questions. Any other questions?
I had the same ones, but
And one last question. Who's presenting this at the board meeting on Tuesday?
We usually don't present.
We don't. Okay.
It's usually right now.
Okay. We are presenting it right now. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you very much for coming to join us.
Thank you for the questions. I never get that many questions, so it's good stuff. It makes it fun for me.
Thanks, Kathy.
So you've got a future Sally for maybe Whipley will hire you if you need.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah,
we
no
appreciate
problem.
it. Thanks for working with the district.
Thanks, Tim.
We, of course, think they're fantastic, but it's always nice to hear that from outside folks, too. Okay, moving on to the regular financial report. Starting on page 96. Is there anything that either one of you would like to walk through or highlight?
In the financial reports, no.
Can you, yep, sorry, thank you.
Pretty standard on the financial reports. We're back into our regular cash flow. Thank you, Tim. And interim financial statements. So if anyone has any questions or would request any other information, I can certainly try to provide that.
I have a couple of questions. Page 97, looking at the revenues under the levy, recognizing that question 2 on our last referendum was about the reduction of class sizes. How are we tracking that levy funds are going towards their voter-approved intent?
We won't see any of that until fiscal year 2020. So that's not in any of our things right now, and that's still part of the process we're working on. So that hasn't been determined yet.
Okay.
How we're going to track that additional from question 2.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your question? Yeah, we're still, and maybe Kathy wants to add something to that, but it's part of our discussions as to our new budget process and how we're going to do that.
I seem to, hold on, just a quick follow-up. I seem to remember, though, that the last levy also had something about class size reduction. And so it should be a part of existing process, not future process. So I'm just wondering how, because I got a lot of questions about that during the election season, that why would they vote for question 2 if they weren't, I'm just wondering what thoughts are around how we can track that the money is being used in the way that the taxpayers approved it to be used.
And I don't think they had a process for tracking that in the past. I know this previous levy was passed 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So what the question was back then, I'm not really sure, or how they're tracking it. It's just been part of the total levy receipts. So they haven't tracked it separately.
So could somebody get me information on what that last language looked like? Because if in fact that is what we had said we were going to use some of the money for, I think it would be nice to try to to be clear in showing that. Yeah, please do.
So we are having discussions on the 2020 budget, which is still just in discovery phase is what I would like to call it. The language that I have seen in the referendum question was that we would be hiring 25 teachers. That was what was in the referendum language, and that we would then be able to track those hires with those dollars for fiscal year 20. Mm-hmm. So the relationship between class size reduction and those teachers is a little bit more complex on how they get distributed, but that will be the process that we'll be working through. But that would be the intent of what that question was saying was, at least in the referendum language that I was a part of, that there would be 25 FTEs hired, and we would be working our way through that process.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does, but I would like to see the language from the last one too, just so we can, because we may be able to start practicing now. Member Oswald?
I believe the language from the last one brought about 15 or 16 FTE from 5 years ago. So, or what would it be equivalent to? And just to clarify, is that question money going towards a ratio, or is it going towards 15 FTE or 25 FTE?
So the definitions that the district uses and definitions that I'm familiar with are a little bit different. So we'll be talking through that. There's a guideline ratio that the district has used to determine the FTE allocation, and we'll be walking through that process, but we're trying to stick with the language that was the expectation of the voters. I think they align with each other, but we're going to have to walk through that process when we get to that point in the budget. Does that help? Okay.
Member Lofog?
I was just going to comment that at one point I can remember having a conversation, and I think it was in a small group session with Superintendent Gronseth where, he could actually take the teacher list and show the 16 positions that were part of the levy, or just that increase. I don't know if, so, we might have had 83 teachers or 830, and now we have 910 or whatever the number would be. I just remember that conversation in our early, our second month on the board last February.
Oh. All right. Okay. Let's see. Any other thoughts? Just quickly, I know that you are in the process of working on changing the way that we do our budget, our financial reports. Do you have any updates on that or any guidance you would like from us?
So, because we're still really focusing on the first parts of the budget, we're working on that right now.
Okay.
And in February, we were hoping to just kind of bring some samples to you just to have as a review, sort of like what we're doing with the pupil reports, which I'll just briefly discuss. And then your feedback would be appreciated on just finding more charts and graphs, general overviews of where we are versus some of the technical things that you might see versus through an audit.
Okay.
So, yep. So we hope to start rolling those out in February.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Assistant Superintendent?
The language we used in the presentations to the schools and the community said add approximately 25 teachers district-wide, if that's the language that you're looking for.
I was looking for the language from the last one 5 years ago.
That predates me. I'm done talking now. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to wire transfers. Any questions there? I just had a quick question about what is the Minnesota Child Support EFT? Maybe I haven't paid close enough attention to this in the past because I don't remember seeing that.
That would be child support that is deducted from employees'
Got it.
wages and then paid.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any questions on the investment transactions? All right. APU projections. You're on.
Thank you. If you could open the 18-19 monthly ADM to enrollments and students January PDF, which would have a grid at the top and 3 charts underneath. It would be the third one on the board book if you're seeing that.
So page 113. 113, I think, with the 3 graphs at the bottom.
Yep. So this is just, first at the top, we're showing the estimated enrollments for fiscal year 19. We budgeted at 8178. We're now projecting at about 8168 if we were to play out enrollments until the end of the year. Keep in mind, this is a moving target all the time. Mm-hmm. So we use our best information. Sometimes we see dips, and then we may see some growth in enrollment again next month. But working with Peggy and Kateri, our Mars person, we've spent an awful lot of time together these last 2 months, just really walking through how we can share this information with you. The piece that's important to me, and maybe it's just because I'm a nerd this way, is the relationship between the students that we're seeing and the ADM or the enrollment that they generate for us. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the top chart where you're seeing the blue and red, The blue is representing how many enrollments it takes for us to get an ADM. And an ADM, which is an average daily membership, is what drives our pupil funding. So when a student is enrolled from the first day of school to the last day of school, they're a 1 ADM for us. And we love those. We love that 1 ADM. But in early childhood, for example, right now it's projecting at about 3.5 students to get us to 1. But if you go down to 17, 18, and 16, 17, by the end of the year, it takes us 6 students to get 1 ADM in early childhood because they're not served every day full time. Mm-hmm. They're only serving part time. So we might be serving a lot of students, but the actual revenue that they generate becomes smaller. And as you can see, as you go through the chart, our elementary is more stable. So we can see that it's just a little bit more than 1.0 ADM to that enrollment. But as you get into the high school, and this is the kind of thing we were talking about when we first started transitioning to these reports, is we see a lot of movement in high school, especially in 11th and 12th grade. And so we can see that, especially looking at 17-18 final, it takes over 2 ADMs, 2 students to get an ADM in 12th grade. So we've got kids being enrolled less than full-time, so we might be serving a lot of students, but they're not generating that full 1.0 for all of us all year long. So that's something that we need to be thinking about in terms of staffing, in terms of who's in the classrooms, but how much revenue are they generating for us. So these numbers, I think, kind of help us understand those pieces a little bit more, because we see people, but we see statistics and numbers. So sometimes when we're talking about the finance side of it, we're seeing that it takes a lot more people to get that revenue that we need. So are these helpful for you? Do these kind of give you that better, and if there's something, I know we've got a lot of numbers in that top grid, so if we can condense that to make it easier for you to see, but like you can see that we have to date, we have over 12,000 enrollment records for our 8,000 students. And as we keep going, that number is going to keep getting bigger. You can see that we are serving at any one time since the beginning of the year to now, we've served over 9,500 students. They may not still be here now, but at some point we were serving those bodies. And then that gets us to the current enrollments, and then that projects out to that ADM, which is important to us as far as funding. So,
to your point about 11th and 12th graders, do we get to count them if they're like doing post-secondary at UMD?
Great question. We don't. We get a certain small portion of their ADM if they're enrolling as a post-secondary, yes. So we get a small portion for the administrative, the counseling fees. Otherwise, their share goes to the college, and then the state pays the college directly. Okay. College in the schools or concurrent enrollment programs that we have that keep the students in the school, then we're getting that full ADM, and they could still be generating college credits while they're still here. So those are kind of programs that districts look at to retain those students rather than going post-secondary.
Any questions or comments on that?
We kept the other 2 reports just as reference, but we'll probably be phasing out some of the older reports and try to kind of focus on these so that we don't overload you with data, even though I would love to give you 4 more reports on pupil count. But hopefully this is something that helps you. And again, I really appreciate any feedback that you could share. If you're like, this isn't doing it for me, or could you show us something in a different way, we'd be happy to do that.
Member Lofeld?
So my question kind of piggybacks off of yours as far as I understand the PSEO, and as much as, I love every opportunity we can provide for our students, and that certainly is an option that our students use, and especially the dilemmas we see with offerings and class sizes. But yet, what do we do with online? So our online students, this would be what I think, is our online students that are enrolled in the Duluth Public School online, we're getting the full 8DM. Those that take it at universities or other online institutes, we lose that portion of their student monies.
Thank you for that question. How much time have we spent talking about this past week? The online programming is very interesting for schools. Students, so because Duluth actually provides an online program, we do retain all those students. But like you mentioned, we do have quite a few ADMs, students taking online courses from other K-12 organizations. There are certain online charter schools or other traditional school districts who offer online programs. And we have to be very careful in the total enrollment offerings, because if a student is taking more than a full class load, the online learning is the top pecking order. So we can actually lose money if a student is taking full time and they also take an online course. So we have to be thoughtful about that. We work with our MARS people here to make sure we're maintaining so that we understand where those online registrations are. So we are very thoughtful about that. And so, and some students open enroll directly to that online school, so they'll be recorded at that school. Other students may just be taking 1 or 2 courses and then still being maintained here, so they may be taking what they call supplemental, so that those are a separate report versus the students that are taking that full-time or comprehensive online learning. And then about post-secondary, which is they may be taking it online, but the umbrella of post-secondary trumps online. So they may be taking an online course, but we still consider it post-secondary first before online. So if they are taking a college course directly through a secondary university, they would be considered a post-secondary, not online. Does that help? Great.
I just want to add to that, we do, and I think you kind of alluded to just the impact of 0 hour on this, and as students do take 0 hour throughout their freshman, sophomore, junior years, potentially that sets up a situation in their senior year where they wouldn't be considered a full-time student because they would already have had credits earned. And so that sets up a situation where you might see some of these numbers with the seniors in particular in terms of the credits, the ADM totals.
Great, thank you. Any questions on the fundraisers? Beef sticks. Just crack me up. All right, moving on to policies. 714 fund balances. This is our second reading of this. And as a reminder, the major change is moving to the policy that we will maintain a minimum unassigned general fund balance of 8% of the unrestricted general fund annual budget. Any questions, comments, concerns on this policy? Okay. Policy 307, conflicts of interest and fiduciary duty. Any discussion? Member Lofeld?
So when I read over this, so even when your term is off the school board, we are still held to this conflict of interest and fiduciary duty, even when we are no longer serving on the school board? It seemed like it said something about, I should have highlighted, that it says that even when we're not any longer serving, we still are bound by conflict of interest. Yes, no, am I wrong? Thought I saw it.
I don't remember reading that.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. It has to do with we can't share confidential, private, non-public, privileged, or proprietary information after our term is up. That's what it is.
Just that one item?
Yep. Member Oswald?
I have a question after reading through this. I have always understood a conflict of interest in one aspect of being if somebody has something financially to gain, and I don't know if that's specifically covered in this. I didn't see that, so I'm questioning whether that's something that we should consider putting in or figure out where it would fit.
It's under 3E.
It's 3E. And it's also 3B.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Thanks.
Any other discussion? Oh, I had a question. I have two questions. On page 122, there is a statement in here, and we might not be able to answer this. There's a statement in here about that contractors are held to the same standard. How do we monitor contractors?
I don't think we are actually monitoring them as far as, say, them disclosing personal information, that type of thing. I don't think they counteract or interact with a lot of personal information, although you may have someone performing a contracted service that works with students, and they may learn some personal information through that. We're not tracking them that way. It would only be if there was an incident that came to our attention that we would know of something like that happening.
So do our contractors get copies of this policy when they sign on the dotted line?
They will once it's approved.
Okay, great. And then my other question was around on page 123, reporting suspected violations. It kind of sounds like you have to go to your supervisor or manager. So are we asking people to do this to make complaints or reports in writing? Do they have to do it verbally? What is their, it does outline here in the instances where the immediate supervisor is involved, the report should be made to the person at the next highest supervisory level. But it doesn't really say how people are, supposed to do it. Like, is there a form people are filling out? Do they have to just go directly to the supervisor?
I don't think there's a form developed yet, and it could be verbal or written. There's no specific method of reporting this. If someone suspects something, they could go talk to their supervisor or the next highest person if their supervisor is involved, and then that person would determine what the next course of action is, if there should be a formal complaint or if it could be handled just with a verbal discussion.
Okay, maybe it's nitpicky, and because I live with somebody who works in HR, but it seems to me that we might want to put some language in here that indicates the mechanism by which people can report. And my caution would be to always get things in writing. Member Oswald?
To kind of piggyback on that, I didn't see any reference to any timeline of reporting. Like, how soon or how long can they wait to report it? I mean, can it be years? Is there like a statute of limitations on? I mean, I don't know. If this is our own policy, I think maybe we can put in there to encourage them to report it as soon as possible, because we don't want to have to be digging through personnel files 3 years later. That would be awful. But I also had another comment, I guess, about on page 22, where it talks about the applicability towards council and advisory council members and site-based council members. When we're talking about members, are we talking about members of the public, or are we still talking about employees? Because we've had this discussion when it comes to placing community members on CITs and things. So does this policy take care of that problem of putting community members on CITs, or is this based on employees as members? I guess I need a clarification on members.
Yeah, I would think if any community member, because it does talk about advisory council members, if any community member is part of an advisory council or sitting on a site-based council, I think this would apply to them.
I would think so, but that has been brought up as a barrier for public to be able to participate on certain councils and groups. So I guess maybe that's a conversation with the superintendent later. Maybe.
Can I clarify? So you're suggesting that because of this policy, community members might not want to sit on an advisory council or a council?
No, I'm saying that community members have been requesting, especially community members that work closely with the comp ed funding, they're requesting that community members be placed on various school building CITs, continuous improvement teams. And one of the responses from the district has been that we have to figure out how to place them on the team without sharing any kind of private data with them. And so if this policy is covering the fact that they may get private data and they have to be confidential about it, then does that open the door for them to be on those teams or not? And
That's
if
how
so,
I
I
read
think
it.
we should have maybe some rules written up about that.
Member Lofeld?
So is this a new policy? We haven't had a policy of this sort? That's correct. We haven't. And the MSBA, is this modeled off of MSBA, or is this created by ourselves?
It's sampled by, this was actually created by St. Paul Public Schools. It came to light when Special Ed had a review from the Minnesota Department of Ed and asked for our conflict of interest policy. We have in one of our purchasing policies a statement that you can't buy from an employee or their immediate household, but nothing to this degree. MSBA does have a sample policy. It's a lot broader and does not cover a lot of these things, and it only talks about public officials and school administrators, where this one covers all employees and contractors, anyone working with any members of the school district, students or staff.
So then could I just just ask a question about, it's on several different places, but it's really on page 123 as well under reporting suspected violations. When it says, or council members, does that mean school board members, or what's a council member?
Committee member, maybe?
Like advisory members, advisory councils.
All employees, contractors, public officials, and what is public officials?
Public officials would be the school board.
Ah, okay. Got it.
I appreciate that it's more encompassing than what it seems like the MSBA model policy is. So thank you, St. Paul School District. So this is our first reading of this. We'll be discussing this again next month. Assistant Superintendent?
Yeah, I can just maybe provide a little bit more input on this. We do have situations where we have people on different committees throughout our district where this policy could come into play. This wouldn't necessarily preclude them from there, but in a situation where we're going to enter into like a financial contract or different things like that, that's where this policy might come into play. But that I don't know that this would directly limit. I'd have to look more into this, but I can't think of off the top of my head how that would necessarily limit that in the ways that you were asking about. So I don't know that this will be a barrier.
I didn't see it as a barrier. I saw it as an opportunity to put people on CIT, committee members on the CIT rather than keep them from it. Because right now we're keeping them from being placed on CITs because of the exposure to private data.
I agree, Member Oswald.
Thank you.
Member Loeffler-Kemp?
Yeah, I'm really glad we have a more thorough, I guess, policy, and so I'm excited that we're moving towards it. I do want to know, or I hope we build in consistent training, and I'm really, I guess, concerned about that, and particularly with our contractors, to be honest. We have a lot of contractors and that have a lot of access in our schools, and I think often our contractors, and I could be wrong, do have other staff supervision. You know, maybe they're working with a teacher or they're working with somebody else while they're doing whatever work they may do, but I would just want to make sure that we have consistency in how this policy is that people are being trained on this policy, I guess. So thank you for bringing it forward, and I don't know if that's something that should be put in here, a line or two about just how the training on this policy or how this policy is going to be put out there to people. Shared, yeah. I don't know.
Any other discussion on that item? We have a half an hour. Okay. 250, school board member compensation bylaw. Any discussion? I appreciated that you provided comparable numbers. Thank you. Okay. Let's see, leases. Of course, I have a question. The lease with the Welch Center for Laura MacArthur, the lease started July 1st. Is there a reason we're just seeing it now?
It's been in the process of being finished for several months. There were communications with the Welsh Center. There was communications with attorneys. Things had been tabled, I understand, for periods of time, and it came back on the table, and Dave Spooner was the lead on this and spent quite a bit of time, and it was just a long, drawn-out process to get that finalized.
Okay.
So we own a Welsh Center? In West Duluth?
They rent space.
They rent space from Laura MacArthur.
We don't own them.
Yeah, it's
$5 whole dollars.
Valley Youth Center.
Valley Youth Center. It's a part of Laura MacArthur School. Okay, yeah. Separate entrance.
And I just wanted to point out it was July 1st, 2017. So it's a backdated lease apparently, so we can get that extra $1 or $2. And I hope that we continue to be able to be this affordable for them.
Yep, I certainly appreciate that too. Do we know if we have any other outstanding leases? Mr. Spooner's not here. Where is our fearless facilities director?
He is on vacation for the first time, and I'm not sure when, but I swear he was like, call me anytime. And we're like, we're not calling you unless
We're not calling him.
Yeah, so.
Do we know if we have any other outstanding leases?
I don't think so.
I don't think
that
so.
was the last one on the list.
That's the last one?
Yep.
Woohoo! Praise the Lord and hallelujah. All right. Great. Acceptance of donations. Just a huge thanks to everyone who donated to ALC for that. Do we know how much money that auction raised?
I do not know the answer to that.
That would be nice to add to the discussion when we approve these. In fact, I wish I would have known about this auction because there are some things on here I thought I would have bid on that. Remember Lowfald?
I just have probably nitpicky too, but when there's donations to our auto program, should it be listed as Denfeld or should it be listed as career tech or something? It's really, that automotive program goes both to East and Denfeld. So when donations are given, does it have to say Denfeld because that's where it's housed? I don't know. I just wanted to allow the community to know that it's a both high school offering, that there are East students taking that class as well. So when it says the donation's going to the auto program, I just want them to know that it's It's our Duluth Auto Program.
Good question. Yes. Number 4. That's what we're on now, right?
We just passed it.
Okay. But I don't think everybody got a copy of,
They did not.
so how are we going to discuss it?
We were just going to bring it up for discussion, and if people were friendly to it, we would send out the contract. We just wanted to make it available to you to see if we could add it to the agenda.
Okay, I'm blowing through stop signs. Okay, so we have been approached, that's not the right word. Sorry, Member Leffler Kemp and I received an email late this afternoon from our esteemed CFO about the potential for ISD 709 to hire a lobbying group. The Costin Group, which is comprised of Gary Cervenic, and Jeff Anderson, to provide legislative and lobbying support. Our CFO has experience working with Mr. Cervenic?
Close. Cirkvenick.
He needs a...
Yep.
So what are you looking for from us on this one?
So we just met with them yesterday. Because we have a specific special education legislation that we would like to pursue, it's challenging because it's unique to Duluth. We would need quite a bit of support at the Capitol. Both Mr. Cirkvenick and Mr. Anderson bring to the table experience and knowledge and networking at the Capitol for committees, and we just felt pretty strongly that getting that additional support, being they're there just about every day when there's committees that happen, they can be there to network and talk about the pieces for Duluth and get us into meetings. The superintendent and myself do plan on doing this as well, but just to have that extra layer. We do have other legislation, the sales tax abatement for Central High School. We have other things that impact Duluth that don't impact other districts that they can have the ear of legislators and groups and organizations. So it would be our request to move forward with hiring the Costin Group for the proposal that they have shared with us, but would be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Could you, just quickly before we get into discussion around this, could you remind us what that special ask is around special education? And then my other question is regarding the consulting agreement, and you guys will get a copy of this later. Do we pay them on a month-to-month basis so we don't have to pay them year-round? It's just the months that we... Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. So the first question about the special education, as you're aware, when the transition from an older special education funding formula to the new special education funding formula happened, there was a calculated gap that was created for Duluth Public Schools. Through the research that the district has done, research that I've done since I got here, in speaking with the Department of Education, it was a unfortunate set of circumstances and timing that put us at a disadvantage for what we would call the base special education revenue. You've probably heard that our base was artificially lower than what it could have been due to circumstances outside of the district control. That has compounded every year since 2016. So we are pulling together data and information to go to the legislature, similar to another school district who did this last year. They were in a bill all the way to the end before it never passed. So we're using that as a template to go to our legislature and say, we would like some reimbursement for those lost amounts. And that's what we would also be working with a lobbyist for, is to help us get that correct language, to have those type of discussions. And so how we get to that specific dollar amount is what we would do is work with our legislators, but it is trying to fill that funding hole that was created by the 2016 change in special ed funding.
Would they do a rebase then as well for?
Great question. I do not think they would do a rebase for us. At the statewide level, I would say almost every district in the state is looking for a change in the funding formula. Mm-hmm. So could that be a part of an overall change in legislation? Cross our fingers, yes. But would they do it for us? No. This would be a specific ask for a reimbursement for an error. I don't think the department would be favorable to trying to do a correction like that for an individual school district, but we certainly are hoping and would promote. I think MSBA is on the front lines of realizing what challenges school districts have, and similar, everyone has a unique story. Special education hits every district individually, so one massive change could actually hurt some districts and help other districts. So we certainly have highlighted those areas in the overall calculation change that would help Duluth, but wouldn't necessarily help another district, even say next door to us. But so the specific ask is to correct the error that was occurred because of the way they did the initial calculation.
Okay.
And then your second question was the proposal is a monthly retainer, and it would be a per year. So they would get a payment per month for the year that we're serving. So it wouldn't just be during the legislative session, because we may use their support and talents even outside of the legislative year if we have other things where they could be supporting us year round. So it would just be a monthly cost for the year. And then we would continue or discontinue the contract at any time.
Thank you. Member Lefferkin?
I am generally supportive of this and know that we used to employ with a collaboration a lobbyist, and some of you may remember that. And so we had wonderful presence at the Capitol, and that person worked, I'm forgetting his name this very moment. Ron Silberg, and pulled in district staff to testify as needed for different things. So having that presence was really important. And certainly Gary's costume group, they do good work, and they've worked locally. They've worked with other school districts, I believe. And that relationship is really key. So I would support this. My only question I was concerned about with the terms of it being for a full year versus during the legislative session. I do have some questions about that. Okay, that seems so I have some questions about that.
And we can certainly work with them to modify the terms of payment. I think it was to make the metered payments manageable. And so we could certainly look at it from that different scope, but they become available to us outside of just during the legislative season, which for districts with the uniqueness Duluth has, there are many times where you might be needing to lay foundations up to a year in advance before we go to the legislature. So it could be that we would be using their services many times throughout the year. So, but I certainly understand that, and we can work with them to provide language in the agreement that would be more favorable.
Member Oswald?
Thank you. In Jill and I's meeting with the superintendent on Friday, he had mentioned about lobbying and that he was having this meeting, but he wasn't quite sold on it. And so I would wish Bill was here so I could hear him sell it to us, because I didn't get the sense that this was something he was really going to jump at. I know he seemed very hesitant. I have the average questions of, like, what is the cost of this contract? Does it require us for approval? And where is that money coming from? And I also would like to know who else they work with, and are there any potential conflicts? Because that was something that we had talked about as the three of us, is that sometimes they represent other districts that have conflicting interests that go against what we want. So I guess, do they have potential conflicts of interest of working with other districts? And how much is this going to cost?
The proposal is for $3,000 a month, so $36,000 a year, which in visiting with the superintendent, which again, I'm sorry, he's not here. I think we both were initially, we've had multiple discussions about lobbyists. I think initially myself, I was like, we'll go down to the Capitol and we'll be able to share our story. This year is a budget year. With the change in the legislature, there are going to be a lot of people asking for a lot of things down there. And for me, and this is what I shared with the superintendent, which I think, I hope I can speak for him to say that he is supportive of this proposal, that having someone there, having someone on the ground for education finance committees, for education policy committees, for the small groups, for special education, where district staff can't be there, they can be our voice. And a lot of times legislation can go different directions quickly, and to have someone there who can make the phone call to say, I need you down here this afternoon because there's going to be a committee hearing and we want you to be there. We wouldn't necessarily know about those things. You know, our potential individual legislation could be, you know, more than $1 million. So if we were successful in that, I think the investment of having someone there would pay off for us, just in that one special education request that we have, in addition to the $5 million abatement for Central High School. And then it also gives us an opportunity to network with them, to hear what other people, what other districts might be asking for. So if we want to get in on even more or additional asks legislatively, we could do that. So sitting in the meeting yesterday, I did feel that this would be a good investment for us, for the district. So that's kind of, I hope that helps. I was kind of the same, like, oh, maybe, but then knowing the complexity of what we're asking for and having someone who will share that knowledge and be there more often than we can be there, I felt was an important value.
So do you know how many other districts they're representing while they're there?
I don't know currently. I know the districts they have worked for in the past. There wouldn't be anything in specific conflict here. Usually a group, a lobbyist like this is doing a specific ask, and so we wouldn't be in competition necessarily for this particular piece. They do also work for the range area municipals, so they support the cities and other municipalities on the range. But they're just doing general service lobbying there. But I don't have any concerns about there being any conflicts on our behalf.
Do you know, since there has not, haven't had a lobbyist since I've been on the board, and I'm in my 4th year now, it would be nice to know how much we paid Ron to compare to, you know, the expense of this team. If that's something you can research and send out with the proposal, that would be really helpful, because I have no idea if $36,000 is reasonable or not.
I don't have the number in front of me, but the reaction that the superintendent gave me was that this is significantly less than what we've paid in the past for the lobbyists that we've had in the past. So we both felt this was a very reasonable amount.
And how are we paying for this?
Paying for it out of school board stipend.
We don't have that much. You're kidding, right?
We do have some
discretionary.
discretionary.
Yeah, exactly.
We do have some discretionary budgets available for us for this cost, and again, we feel that with the potential return, that this would be a wise investment with administration budgeted dollars.
Thank you.
So you'll send out the information, and then There are 4 references that are included in the proposal. I don't know, Chair, if you would like me to make the calls as chair of the business committee, or if you want to do that.
I think we should talk with our staff about doing
All
that.
right.
Yeah.
Great.
I just have one more
Go ahead.
comment. Okay. On this, I also just want to emphasize that when we did work with Ron, he worked, I can't remember the group he worked with, but he wasn't just working for us. He was working with a different group. This does not, and I was include expenses, whereas I think probably with Ron we were paying expenses, if I remember right, and so that keeps the cost down a little bit. I think it's because their background and they do work in northeastern Minnesota, that really will strengthen us as a district, that this particular group has that history with northeastern Minnesota, and I think that's a good thing. And let's see, the other thing I just wanted to share is I do hope I have had many conversations with the superintendent since this presentation yesterday, and so I believe that he is a supporter of this, and maybe had questions last Friday because he hadn't had the presentation. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of him, but I do get the strong sense he supports moving forward. And I certainly know the work that has gone into that Superintendent Grunset and many other staff have done in the last few years when we haven't had someone down there, the additional work to try and stay on top of things. And many of us went down extra just because we didn't have that presence, and we still want to go down, but I think it's a win-win for us. So thank you for bringing it forward in a timely way with the session already beginning this week. So,
Assistant Superintendent?
Yep. I can speak on his behalf, and I can echo some of the things that were said here by Kathy. There were some initial questions that he had, and he wanted to seek some further guidance on that, and he was able to get those questions answered, and upon getting them, he did want to move forward with that, and so he is in support of that. I do not have the pricing information, though.
Member Lofeld?
I too just want to say that I think it's a good way to spend some money. I think we just heard a comment from you earlier in our presentation about, you are watching our budget, and there's a different way that you're going to fund things. You want to make sure that we're funding and spending our money in a judicious way, but we will probably benefit. What rank are we as a district? You said 26, but we're higher up in a city for a school district our size. So where are we? Are we the 6th highest school district in the state? 10th? Are we 26th?
26.
Okay.
Yep, that's
We're
in
the
pupil.
26th.
That's in pupil counts.
Okay. But even that, in the top 30, it would behoove us to have a lobbyist. I think maybe we've lost money in the last years that we haven't had Ron Solberg representing us. And so I think it's a good way to use our budget and our money to ensure a voice down there, and they know what they're doing, and they're going to use us where they can use us. And I just think it's a good presence to have, especially as Kathy highlighted this year, new governor, lots of good bills. So I know I'd be supporting it.
This is the other piece of the legislative session is we have this large projected one-time surplus. The second year of the biennium has much less, but if there was a year that individual needs could be looked at, and the legislature could feel, because we're not asking for a fixed funding stream for out years, this seems like a really good opportunity for us to be asking for that with that large surplus.
Good discussion. So we'll get that information circulated. It'll be on the agenda next week. Member Oswald, to your question, I work with a lot of lobbyists on the healthcare side of things, and $36,000 is like an hourly rate for for some of them. So I was a little shocked too, and I think if we can do some contract negotiations, that would maybe be beneficial. Although I do think your point's really well taken about the off season, and we think about how much interaction we have with legislators when they're back home in the district during the summer, and so that seems like a good time to capitalize on that. Okay, great. Moving on to informational items, number 6, anything on the expenditure contracts? I, of course, have 2 things.
I had something on the bank account.
Oh,
resolution.
go ahead. Sorry, I skipped over that.
That we're removing an authorized signer, but we're not adding an authorized signer. Are there still authorized signers for this account? Okay. Thank you.
For expenditure contracts, looking on page 166, the contract, I think this is for a social worker. Again, that contract started September. So I'm just continuously wanting to ask the district that we're not signing contracts without talking about it as a board. And then just curious about why it says NA under the chair and the clerk's signature. I haven't seen that on contracts before. Anyone know? I'm on page 168.
They used an old contract template. It's in their signing authority, so the board doesn't need to sign, so it's not applicable for the board chair and clerk signature.
Got it. Okay. So that's why it's informational. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then the other question I have is on page 175. And this is about the fundraiser race at Homecroft, and I have 2 questions. Well, one's a request and one's a question. First, item 16, choice of law or venue. I would ask that we negotiate with them to either go silent or to change the law, to change it to Minnesota rather than the state of Georgia.
We've already signed it.
Okay. I keep bringing this up because it really does make a big difference if we were to get into any sort of litigation, because then we would have to hire somebody who has Georgia, who either works in Georgia or who has passed the bar in Georgia. And so I really want to ask that, I know, but I really want to ask that as we're signing contracts that we're taking a look at the choice of venue, and either ask people to go silent on it or change it to Minnesota. So I look at that all the time, and it gets under my skin. My second question, and I don't know if anybody can even answer this, is did we look at local companies to do this? Because there are people in the area who do this professionally, and we like to support local business. So rather than, maybe that's a question for the principal. Okay.
Actually, I think I have some background information on that because I just went to the last PTO meeting on Friday that they had, and from my understanding, they're still bouncing around who's going to be responsible for this fun run, but it's the same people that Lester Park used. So it's just a different location. So this contract has already been through us once, supposedly, when Lester Park tried to do it and was very successful at it. So.
Okay. I still think, looking for local partnerships would be fantastic. Member Leflicamp?
Yeah, I was at Lester Park when they did their event. I don't know much about it except that I think they have a base or staff that came up here from the Twin Cities. So I did talk with them. So I think there is some kind of local Minnesota focus anyways. I do also, I guess, want to say, while this needs to go through us, I think when certain organizations, like the foundation or the PTA, PTO, they have a little leeway about, which companies they go with, and we need to.
Listen, I'm not
Yeah,
asking them
yeah.
to reverse anything. It was
Yeah,
just a question.
Yeah, I know. We got to kind of, I guess, honor their organization as well. So.
Yep. I was just curious. Let's see. Moving on, we've got 6 minutes. No cost contracts, we're good there. Any questions around the revenue contracts? I think we'll hold off on questions for facilities management since Mr. Spooner isn't here. I would encourage you to, I have a few questions, so I'll just email those to him. And then last but not least, the compensatory revenue expenditure update. Any questions on that? I have one question or a request on that one. Could you include totals on that sheet? So for Denfeld, if their discretionary dollars is 514,708, I'm not as fast with a 10 key as you are, as I witnessed earlier today. But if we could just put a totals line in the bottom under each school, so we know where they're at, or do they match? Do they all match? They all match. Okay, never mind. Then you've already done it. Thank you, Member Oswald.
I just had a question, specifically in reference to Denfeld, where it lists at the very bottom professional development / materials, and then the next line is materials. I'm gathering that it's materials for professional development in the first line, and they have a $50,000 non-labor budget, and I'm just curious, what are examples of non-labor materials that affect student achievement that would fit under comp ed?
I've taken that from information they have submitted to me. So professional development materials / materials are both, I know they have had some contracted services for trainings for professional development that they've been working on. And so what all is included in that, I don't know any details on it, but that's what they've submitted as their budget. As you can see, they still have a lot left to spend on that. And then the other line just says materials. That's kind of just general materials for throughout the school.
Okay. And are those materials being kind of audited to make sure that they're fitting in the comp ed resolution part of this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Well, with 3 minutes to spare, we will adjourn the business committee meeting. Thank you to those of you who are able to go to the Teacher of the Year event tonight, and we'll see all of you at the conference.